Have you ever noticed that funerals almost always seem to follow the same color rules? In many countries, people arrive wearing black suits, black dresses, black ties, and dark shoes, as if the entire world agreed on one universal dress code for grief. But then in some places, especially in parts of Asia, mourners wear white instead. And strangely enough, both colors are meant to represent sadness, respect, and mourning. So why black? Why white? Why do humans use colors to express grief in the first place? And who decided these were the correct funeral colors? Let's break it down, right here, on History of Simple Things. Humans have associated clothing with mourning for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations often had specific funeral garments or colors meant to show sorrow and respect for the dead. In ancient Rome, mourners sometimes wore dark-colored togas called a togapula. The darker fabric symbolized grief and separation from normal life. Meanwhile, in ancient China and several other East Asian cultures, white became the traditional color of mourning. White was associated with death, purity, the afterlife, and the spiritual world. Unlike modern Western culture, where white often symbolizes weddings or innocence, many Asian traditions connected white with emptiness and the end of earthly life. The widespread use of black funerals in Europe became especially strong during the Middle Ages and later during the Victorian era in the 1800s. After the death of Prince Albert in 1861, Queen Victoria famously wore black mourning clothes for the rest of her life. Because she was such an influential monarch, mourning fashion spread across Britain and eventually much of the Western world. Black funeral clothing became a social expectation rather than just a personal choice. Black carries a powerful emotional effect on humans. It is often associated with darkness, night, endings, seriousness, and silence. When someone wears black at a funeral, it visually communicates that this is not a celebration or casual gathering. It signals respect and emotional restraint. But there were also practical reasons. In earlier centuries, black dyes were expensive and difficult to produce. Wearing black clothing showed that a family could afford proper mourning attire. Wealthier families sometimes even had different stages of mourning clothing, with strict rules about what fabrics and shades could be worn. Black also helped create social unity during funerals. Imagine a funeral where everyone wore bright, distracting clothing. It would pull attention away from the ceremony itself. Wearing similar dark colors keeps the focus on remembrance and grief rather than personal fashion. Psychologists also believe dark colors affect human mood and behavior. Black clothing tends to create a quieter, more formal atmosphere. People naturally behave more solemnly in environments dominated by darker tones. While black dominates funerals in much of Europe and the Americas, white mourning traditions remain common in countries like China, India, Korea, and Japan. In many of these cultures, white symbolizes purity, spiritual transition, and detachment from earthly life. Instead of representing darkness, white represents emptiness and the soul leaving the physical world behind. In traditional Chinese culture, white funeral clothing was often made from plain, undyed fabric. The simplicity mattered because funerals were not supposed to be about wealth or appearance. The focus was meant to stay on honoring the deceased. In Hindu traditions, white is also strongly connected with mourning. Family members often wear simple white garments during funeral ceremonies because white symbolizes purity, peace, and spiritual release. Bright colors are usually avoided because they represent celebration and worldly pleasure. It's interesting how two completely opposite colors, black and white, can both symbolize grief depending on the culture. This shows that mourning traditions are deeply shaped by history and beliefs, rather than universal human instincts. If funerals today seem formal, Victorian mourning traditions were on another level entirely. During the 19th century, mourning became almost like a social system with detailed rules. Widows were often expected to wear full black clothing for at least 1 to 2 years after a husband died. Some women wore heavy black veils that partially covered their faces in public. Even jewelry had mourning rules. Special mourning jewelry sometimes contained black enamel or even woven strands of the deceased person's hair. There were also half-mourning stages where people gradually returned to normal colors after long periods of grief. Purple, gray, and lavender were sometimes introduced slowly after strict black mourning periods ended. These customs heavily influenced modern funeral traditions in Western countries. Even though most people no longer follow Victorian mourning rules, the idea that funerals should involve dark, modest clothing never fully disappeared. Modern funerals are becoming more flexible than they used to be. Some families now request colorful clothing instead of black to celebrate a loved one's personality or life. You may hear phrases like "wear bright colors" or "don't wear black" in funeral invitations today. Still, black remains the default funeral color in much of the world because it instantly communicates respect and seriousness. Even people who are not religious or traditional often choose black simply because it feels appropriate for the occasion. So why is it always black or white at funerals? Because for thousands of years humans have used colors to express emotions that are difficult to put into words. Black came to symbolize grief, seriousness, and respect in many Western cultures, while white became connected with purity, spiritual transition, and mourning across much of Asia. These traditions were shaped by religion, royalty, social customs, psychology, and history. And even though funeral traditions continue to evolve, those colors still carry emotional meaning that people instantly recognize. In the end, funeral colors are less about fashion and more about communication. Without saying a single word, they quietly tell everyone the same thing. Someone important has been lost, and this moment deserves respect. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.